And so a lot of philanthropy and organizations are starting, and many have historically, but there's a strong push towards trying to reach new audiences. And a lot of folks are saying, okay, now we really need to focus on DEI work. We need to focus on that communities of color in whatever neighborhood or whatever. How are you seeing that reflected now? Are you seeing more organizations coming to you and saying, hey, I really want to do this outreach, and how do you respond to that?
We have had more organizations come to us, in part, I think, because they are trying to diversify their operations and their the partners that they work with.
Right.
So they may not come to us specifically to reach a community of color, but they're coming to diversify who they work with to see if the different people bring a different perspective to their work in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we do. I think all people who are different bring different perspectives. When it comes to them reaching communities of color, I think the clients I really enjoy working with are ones who are willing to be experimental, if not for us, certainly for them. So we may be asking them to try something different that they've never done before, to trust us in trying a communications channel. That might be having a radio station do a live remote from an activity. That's so different for a foundation that feels like they are talking about a product, but sometimes their philanthropy is a product, and sometimes it's a service. And so just like any other item, it benefits from having the endorsement and the energy that a live remote broadcast can bring to it, where a DJ is talking about what you're doing. So experimenting with tactics that are sort of tried and true in communities of color is something that requires a little bit of trust and bravery on the part of a philanthropic organization. But a lot of times our clients, they're willing to kind of float with us on that and see what happens.
And I want to go back to this idea of showing up authentically, and trying to communicate. But when you're working with an organization, are folks like, okay, well, we have this grant and we're trying to do outreach and and we've got to increase our diversity, and I want to make sure somebody on my board is a person of color, whatever the story is? Or is it, I'm trying to reach new audiences, I'm trying to expand my business, and I have completely missed the mark in the south side of Chicago or whatever? Kim, help me understand. I imagine you're able to discern pretty quickly whether somebody is really just trying to check a box and say, here's my diversity check, or are they truly trying to understand how to relate and communicate and engage and sell their product or whatever it is?
I think the telltale sign of the genuine versus the check the box is speed. So if an organization is willing to take the time that it takes to create that authentic connection, or realizes, maybe we have a 6-month timeline and they realize in month 2, they just can't move that fast. And they're willing to reconfigure the plans to allow them to move at the pace that is more authentic for both the organization and the goals. That's a good sign. As opposed to, an organization that might just say, drive, we gotta go.
Print those posters, let's do it. Slap them up.
Sometimes, almost with any organization we work with, Mark, we discover something about each other in the process of working together. So you discover that the way the leader sees the organization is not aligned fully with the way the team sees it, or
maybe the community sees it,
So the way you've been talking about yourselves is not quite connecting, you think it's because you haven't met the people you're trying to connect with. It's because the words you're saying, there's a phrase from a movie, do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? It's like the words that are coming out of your mouth aren't quite authentic to who you are presenting as.
Okay, but I'm just going to push back then, because you said earlier that it's the same message.
Same message, but the message needs to be true. So if you say, if you say you are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and someone goes to your website and there's no statement on the website about that commitment, none of your board members are candidates of, who represent diverse communities, which is okay, because maybe you're transitioning. That doesn't mean that your white board members can't have a statement affirming their commitment. If you say you're committed and none of your board members have any connections on their social profiles, nobody's reading. Here's a common one. Organizations will say they're committed to DE&I, and we'll ask them, do they have any subscriptions? Do you have a subscription to the daily newspaper? Yes, you do. Okay, great. Do you have a subscription to any community newspapers produced by people of color? No. Okay. So you're not following the news that audience is consuming, but that's a disconnect between what you're saying and what reality is.
Let's use kind of the different approaches and some approaches that you've seen that work really well, and maybe some that haven't worked as well. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yes, I think that approaches that have worked well, people might not like this, but they are ones that are, as I mentioned earlier, are willing to be nimble on the timeline. So be willing to assess and speed up or slow down on what they thought they could achieve in a certain amount of time. Because sometimes it's like taking your first trip abroad. Like you think you know what to pack until you go and you're like, I took too much, or I forgot that. So when you're on this journey, there are things you don't know that you need until you're on the journey. And so that might mean recalibrating what you thought could happen. I think what also works well is when leadership is involved. That's really helpful, because leadership attending meetings, leadership learning along with everyone else, sends a message to everyone else that this really is an organizational commitment and not something that everybody else is supposed to do. Even when the leader is a person of color, the leader who's a person of color doesn't give the impression that they already have it figured out because they belong to that population. Might not be true. So it's really helpful when they are as committed as they expect everyone else to be.
Well, I suspect leadership too, sorry to cut you off, but I suspect it takes a strong leader or a seasoned, maybe that's not the right adjective either, but one that comes to you and says, Kim, help me understand this new audience. That takes a brave person to say, I don't know how to connect with Black women or whatever. And I'm trying to expand my, products and services to, specifically Black women in Chicago, whatever the case may be. That takes a brave person to do that.
It does. It takes humility. It takes being ready to get your ego bruised a little bit. I was once in a session where we were reviewing messaging with the entire staff of an organization. And a team of leaders had looked at it and had made some edits to the messaging that we didn't agree, Red Resources didn't agree with. But at a certain point, we give our best counsel, and this got to be messaging that you own. So they had made changes, and we knew it was going to go before the whole staff. And so when it did go before the whole staff, there were 3 words in the messaging that we thought were going to be contentious words for Black women. So when the messaging was read aloud in front of the whole staff, the 4 Black women in the room like did what we do when we see something we don't like. It was the whole physical reaction of, oh,
Right.
that kind of thing. And, it was one of those things that kind of had to play out, but the true courage comes in sitting still and asking why, like, because you could just say, oh, we'll change that, but you should understand why. You should understand, because you got to learn from that. Also, you should change it, because if it irks your 4 employees who represent that population, chances are it's going to resonate the same way in the public.
Right. And not that 4 Black women represent every Black woman's, opinion and ideas. But yeah, like clearly, but I think you're right. Understanding why. And again, back to authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Help me understand.
And recognizing that very often your employees are the ones who need to be your first audience. A lot of times we're so quick to look externally, but the employees, even if they don't represent the group, they need to feel comfortable with embracing the stance and the messaging and the strategies and the tactics, because they gotta carry them out. And a lot of times we when you ask me what doesn't work so well, it's forgetting to include the team.
Interesting. So again, let's just go back to this idea. I'm trying to reach women of color in South Chicago. And if I'm hearing you correctly, at the end of the day, you're thinking about like whatever, the posters, the messaging or whatever. But it sounds like sometimes I suspect as a consultant, it's like, oh, Kim and I are going to do work together, or whatever it is. And you get in there and you're like, wait a second, this is not the gig I signed up for. So it seems like there's more pre-work, if you will, versus the actual communications at the end.
Yep. Yeah. Little workshopping, or sometimes a lot of workshopping and listening to, so we know who we're trying to talk to, but it's helpful to understand the experiences we've had in the past when we tried to talk to those audiences. So what felt good, what didn't feel good, what questions were asked, what information did you not have? So it
and it's
helps
not
to
the
dive in.
messenger as well, or let's unpack the messenger too. So I would imagine you're going to be able to speak with Black women better than I would, right? Or not, again, we're generalizing and saying, all Black women, all white men, or whatever. But
I think that's an assumption. It is maybe true. I mean, it also, not all Black women are, like you just said that. So it depends. It depends. I think I may be seeing things through rose-colored lenses, but I just think the more authentic you are, the more connectable you are, no matter who you are. Yes, I'm going to be able to walk into certain spaces and instantly feel comfortable, because I may look like the people who are in the space already. They will look at me. I'm a brown African-American woman. So I am brown skinned. I do not look African in my mind. I do not look Jamaican. I look like a regular American Black woman. So that just kind of makes it a little simpler for me than it would if I were fair skinned or darker skinned. So we have to be honest about all these things, especially in a city like Chicago, where color and race, it's just ingrained in how we move in the city. In other places, it may not be that way, but here it is. So I need to be very transparent about understanding all parts of me and how that presents, and you too. So if you were to go into a space where you walk into an office or a meeting room and you're the only white man there, you got to know right away how the dynamics will shift, how there will be feelings of curiosity, feelings of maybe you might feel uninvited or unwelcomed, and then there will be some people who will overcompensate and eagerly welcome you to make you feel at ease. So you got to know all of that, and as you deliver a message, whatever that messaging is in your head, you've got to do it in a way that recognizes what the dynamics are in that space. But you can do it. It's just recognizing the context that you're in, and I think sometimes we fail to understand context.
Mm-hmm.
And so another tip of what works well is being a good observer.
Right.
It's being a really good observer
Mm-hmm.
of it's something that
Put your
many of
spidey
us,
senses out.
yeah, you know, when you go into most spaces, you know who has the power right away.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is the security guard, the administrative assistant at the front desk, the person sitting in the office at the back, you kind of get a sense of who everybody's playing to, catering to.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know what power you bring into a room.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us, if we pay attention to that, we know how to shift our power. We know how to open ourselves up with gestures, with our body language, with our words, with our faces. Yeah, yeah. So all of these things come into play, especially if you're going into a space where you are the minority in that space.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the communication strategies, and we're focusing right now on Black and brown women. But let's shift gears. How would you suggest that might look differently, or what are the elements that I should think about if you as a Black woman are working with a Filipino organization, or I don't know, you're trying to reach a Filipino audience? How do you do that?
I think we would begin by trying to understand what are the cultural nuances and the cultural bedrocks,
Mm-hmm.
the bedrock of that, or of those people. So
Mm-hmm.
what we know, what we think we know about Filipinos
Mm-hmm.
could be positioned as a question of, does this apply to you? Does this apply in this organization? I mentioned that we work for St. Bernard Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They have a large contingent of Filipino nurses.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a community over the past 50 years that has consistently existed in this hospital. So what do I want to know about them begins by me asking them questions rather than me assuming, all Filipinos grow up to want to be nurses. No, not,
Right.
But what is the thing? You begin with curiosity, like what brought you here?
Uh-huh.
And how does this connect you to your people or your family? Right. So I think part of the approach with any organization is just being open-minded and curious and asking questions without making assumptions. I may have data in my head. I may know, 37% of Filipinos who make it to the United States are nurses. That's data.
Yeah.
But yeah. I'm not going to lead with data. I'm going
Right.
to ask that individual or that group of people about themselves. And then maybe I'll bring the data point out, or maybe I'll bring forward the thing I've heard or I've always learned, but I'm not going to lead with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.